Good morning. Please find your seats and prepare for this morning's service. For those of you who are new, welcome. For those of you also here in the sanctuary, please know that we are still in a situation where we are asking everyone to please wear masks, stay socially distant, and keep our safety in paramount. Though we're in a state where it is okay to carry your guns to protect yourself, we need to encourage everyone to wear masks to also protect themselves. For those of you who are with us through YouTube, though we'd really love to have you here, we understand and we want to go ahead and welcome all of you to our service as well. I want to remind everyone to please read the order of service where you see the announcements. One announcement in particular has been updated, and that is to let you know that our garage sale will be canceled. Please look for information once the committee is comfortable in bringing that back to our announcements. You also have your announcements that come every Thursday, as well as the Unigram, as well as the website. Our communication teams encourages you to please use that website to know what's going on here at the service. Also want to remind you that while we're not in quarantine, again, we do practice social distancing. We are very lucky to have the expert advice from Dr. Emilio Perez-Ore with us. And though we've seen the numbers reach over 15,000 an average last week, and where we had our 10,000th death, we want to make sure that all of us are protected. I want to also say that the flowers this morning are in memory of the passing of Timmy Priscilla Barrington, the beloved wife of Mel Barrington. Now let us set ourselves for the service. Please silence any devices and sit back and enjoy Anna as she plays the prelude. Thank you.
Our musical prelude this morning is The Cascades by Scott Joplin.
Thank you, Anna. By the time we get to the lighting of the chalice, our feet will be stopping its beat. But again, thank you so much. And if you all would, please join me in standing, if you're willing and able, as we share the congregational covenant. Love is a doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is its and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community. Thus do we covenant with one another. Please be seated and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Columbia. My name is Mark Drews, and I'm honored to serve as today's service leader in the absence of our Reverend Stephen Robinson. So Stephen, if you're here, here's to you, Reverend Robinson. We all love you more than you will know. In the absence of Reverend Robinson, the worship committee pulls together wonderful replacement service providers. And today we have a wonderful pair of congregants who will be sharing with you. Whenever we don't have members, we have wonderful, outstanding, engaging guests from the wider community. Today, Pat Mohr and Richard McLeod will engage in conversation about their personal history and experiences coming to age in the 60s and issues that they faced as Southerners regarding race. As all of you know, Unitarian Universalism is a diverse and non-creedal religion. We are a covenantal religion, which means we don't have to believe the same, to treat each other the same with respect, equity, compassion, and dignity. Our community is one of deeds, not creeds. As Unitarian Universalists, we side with love, embracing all people, regardless of their age, their color, race, economic status, physical ability, or their religious background. We are a welcoming community, which means we embrace LGBTQ plus individuals. We encourage everyone to wear name tags so that we can know one another better. That's code for so we remember who we are. Board members wear green name tags, and they're always welcome. Your comments, your questions, and your suggestions. And at this time, it would be appropriate if our board members would please stand to be recognized. Thank you. At this time, we'd like to recognize any guests that we have with us today. And I'd love to be able to come around and have you introduce yourself by sharing your name and where you're from. And though this provided me an opportunity to come a little closer to you, I want to go ahead and welcome all of you again and make my trip back. We hope soon to be able to say at this point that after service, we invite you back to the sanctuary. Be looking forward to the day when we can go ahead and share that. This time, take a pause as we light today's chalice, being lit by two congregants who've been with us since 2012. And I remember that service. It was in May, and it was during a welcoming and a membership. New members were welcomed to our service. It was the first time Patty and I joined the service, and we had an opportunity to meet with you. The Verns have been very instrumental here at the service, or in our congregation. Jim has been a long time and loyal attendee of the forum since that time, and they both have been very instrumental in the September set, and they can't wait until we can return to that again. They're avid supporters of the Mountain Retreat and Learning Center, and they've been organizing annual volunteer week for interested and energetic people from our congregation. There's information about the retreat that they've scheduled for September in the order of service. So at this time, if you light the candle, we know that we light this chalice as a symbol of the Unitarian Universalism. Its base represents our history and living tradition. The bowl includes all truth seekers and justice makers, and the flame provides the transformative power of love. Spirit and light be with us all. This time, I want to go ahead and bring Anna back for some music.
This morning's musical meditation is Tender Thought from 10 Short Essays by Ulysses K. Ulysses Kay was an African-American composer who studied piano at the encouragement of his uncle, the jazz legend Joe King Oliver, and later studied with William Grant Still. He studied with Bernard Rogers, Paul Hindemith, and at the Eastman School of Music and Yale University. He also taught at Boston University and the University of California, Los Angeles. He spent the majority of his career composing commissions and scores for film and television.
Thank you, Anna. Today we're honored to have an opportunity to hear from two congregants. Pat Mohr has been a UU since 1973 and a member of this congregation since 1986. She's a retired educator whose focus was on research with education and experience in cognitive psychology. She also worked very hard on issues dealing with the study of prejudice. She identifies herself as agnostic humanist and has spoken from this pulpit many times over the years. Richard McLeod has been with UUCC since 2013. He was born in downtown Columbia and was raised a Baptist as well as a Seventh-day Adventist. But he gave up organized religion while he was in college in Tennessee. His career is also in education and was spent mostly in public administration, retiring in 2004. His main retirement activities include many things here at the congregation, but also traveling the world with his lovely wife, Linda. This time, I'd like to go ahead and ask that Richard come up with the opening words.
Thank you, Mark. I think I'll just speak from here, and I have my handy notes. What would we ever do without computers and cell phones and all to read from? Anyhow, I'm going to read this morning from The Help. Have you seen the movie The Help? Everybody's probably familiar with it by now. But anyhow, it's a historical fiction novel by an American author called Catherine Stockett, and it was first published in 2009. The story is about African Americans working in white households in Jackson, Mississippi during the early 1960s. Aibileen is the maid in the white household reading a bedtime story to little Miss May Mobley. Aibileen continually encourages May Mobley by saying, "You is smart, you is kind, and you is important." And in this piece I'm going to read you here, this is Aibileen's account. She's telling this story about when she was reading a story to this young girl. "Once upon a time, there was two girls, I say. One girl had black skin, one girl had white." And May Mobley look up at me. She's listening. "Little colored girls say to little white girl, 'How come your skin be so pale?' And little white girls say, 'I don't know. How come your skin be so black?' What do you think that means?" But neither of the little girl knew. So the little white girls say, "Well, let's see. You got hair, I got hair. And I gives May Mobley a little tousle on her head. And the little colored girls say, well, I got a nose, you got a nose. And I gives her nose a little tweak. She got to reach up and do the same to me. And little white girls say, I got toes, you got toes. And I do the little thing with her toes, but she can't get to mine because I got my white work shoes on. So we's the same, just a different color, say the little colored girl. And the little white girl, she agreed, and they was friends. The end. Well, baby girl just looked up at me. Law, that was a sorry story if I ever heard one. There wasn't even any plot to it. But May Mobley, she just smiled, and she say, tell it again.
We've come to a point in our service where we have an opportunity to share our joys and concerns with one another. If you have any joys and concerns, please pick up a candle on your way in, and we'll use that as a way to go ahead and have you have an opportunity to come and share. For those at home, if you have a joy or concern that you would like shared, please send it to Andrea by Friday afternoon, and we'd go ahead and include it in our service. This time, those of you who've picked up a candle, if you would, come on down and please share with us.
All right, we have a mix of joy and sorrow, I guess. Our little one, Soraya Mercedes, is going away to college. She's going to the University of Pittsburgh, which is kind of far away from us, but fortunately close enough to other family members that will keep an eye on her. So I know her mom probably is going to miss cooking and singing with her and chatting. I'm probably going to miss triggering her eye roll when I tell her joke dads, but that jokes. But we're excited for her, so it's kind of a mix of joy and sorrow.
Thank you, and congratulations, Mercedes. Excited for you.
All right. Well, I wrote my things, so I'll see if I can remember well, because I'm a writer. Thank you. Oh, wow. All right. Well, the first candle is for my stepmother. My mom died in 1990, and Faye was my stepmom for 30 years. And she was a Tybee girl and a very skilled paper cutter. And she died very peacefully June 30th. And I'd like to light this candle for her. And I'm gonna light three. Also would like to light a candle for Carlisle Kelly. He was a dear friend of our family's. I knew him since he was age 5 in our neighborhood. And he was a good friend of Jimmy's. And he died May 29th, a week away from his high school graduation. And he's still in my thoughts every day. And the third candle is just is for all the kids who are going back to school and all the dangers that they have to deal with and stresses that they have. And I'm not talking about just the virus. Obviously that's there, but others too. So that's for them. That's it. You get your phone back.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Pat?
Did you make an announcement about Tootsie? Good morning, Pat Mohr. I'd like to make an announcement about something that happened this weekend. Some of you may remember Tootsie Holland. She's come here for years. She had a stroke Saturday night, and Anna Thomas was with her and took her to the hospital, and they sent her back home. It was a very light stroke, and they got medicine to her right away. So she doesn't seem to have a lot of after effects except the confusion, and I think one side's a little weaker than the other. But I thought some of you might like to know, so you can give her a call. Also, the horrible thing that happened was when Anna and she got back to the house, they found out that the nephew that has lived with Tootsie now for a while, and they've taken care of each other's, they found him dead in the bedroom. So she's undergoing a lot of stress right now and needs your help and your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Chuck?
Hi, Chuck Ashley. First of all, for all my old hippie brothers and sisters out there, and those of you who are hippies at heart, today was the first day of Woodstock, 52 years ago. Now I'd like to light a candle for Afghanistan and the continuing trouble that they're having there, all the innocent people, the children who were confused and scared, and for our president who needs to be able to make some really wise decisions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. It's Bruce. I'm just lighting this candle for myself and Nick. That's number one. And thanks to the Caring Committee for the card. It took a while to get to us. It was sent to the wrong address, but thank you. He's not doing well right now. He got up, got dressed, and fell right back asleep. And that's part of leukemia. Also, I'm lighting this, I was going to say with Tootsie, because I miss her. She's a really good friend. And also, it's a three for my friend, kind of like a brother. I haven't seen him in a while, but he passed with COVID yesterday. So it's still bad, and it's still around. But thank you for everything you do for me and Nick.
Hello, good morning. I'd just like to light a candle for all the people in Haiti who are suffering from the terrible earthquake and the storms that are about to hit them.
Thank you all. Mentioned earlier about the flowers that have been donated in memory of Timmy Priscilla Barrington, wife of Mel, who passed away this past Tuesday after a lengthy illness. Both Mel and his daughter Robin have been with them and was by her side during the time she passed. So please be keeping them in your thoughts and send positive energy to the Barrington family. We also have sad news that was shared with us just yesterday, and that being that Ann Johnson's grandson, Zachary, died this week from a seizure suffered at the University of South Carolina. He was an engineering student, and his family is in Lexington. He leaves behind his parents and a brother. And please be keeping them and Ann and their entire family in your thoughts. We will light this candle for both the Barringtons and Ann Johnson family, as well as all those that are too deep and too precious and remain close to our heart at this time. At this time, please join me in a moment of silence to consider these and other joys and concerns. Thank you, and appreciate you allowing me to consolidate some of the candles. Visions of Justin Young came into my head as we increased the number of candles being lit here at the chalice. We go from sharing the plate to an opportunity of sharing our abundance, an opportunity to go ahead and share how important it is that we demonstrate our ability to be a sharing community. Along with this comes, every month we have an organization, a nonprofit local organization that half of our cash collection go to. And this month it is Palmetto Place Children's Shelter. It's a local nonprofit organization that provides a safe and nurturing environment for abused and neglected children and unaccompanied teens, offering them a broad range of services. If you're contributing by check, please include the words "Share the Plate." If you're at home, please go to our website, click Donate button, and use that as a means to contribute to our organization. We're only not quite a month and a half into our fiscal year and want all of you to please encourage one another to give generously to this wonderful congregation so that we can continue our good work. At this time, would the ushers please come forward for today's offering?
Our offertory selection this morning is The Single Petal of a Rose from the Queen's Suite by Duke Ellington.
Thank you, Joan. And we accept this contribution as a token of the wonderful and generous community that we are. Now, we have a wonderful opportunity to hear from Pat and Richard. As all of you know, we are the sum of our experiences, and those experiences shape the people that we are. And we have an opportunity now to sit back and enjoy a conversation between Pat and Richard.
Am I on? Okay. You're talking to a naturally low-tech person. This is the first time I've ever worn one of these things. If you can hear me breathing, let me know. We're happy to be here with you today. I guess I like to start off the way I used to with most of my lectures with a question. What is race? As Mark told you, my background's in cognitive psychology, so that's the perspective from which I've always looked at this concept. This country has a race problem, and it's had one since its beginning. Is it not working? Oh, okay. It has had since its beginning, and the question's why. You know, I think that tribalism really is hardwired into us from birth. Let me explain. Humans are rapid learners because they learn by forming concepts, by grouping things. And part of that is stereotyping. You see things that look or sound alike seem the same. And you treat all members of that group as the same. And that makes learning a lot easier and faster. That's the reason humans are such good learners. It's also very protective as a survival mechanism. If the caveman hadn't recognized a saber-toothed tiger, he'd be dead by now. So it was a survival mechanism. But we're still evolving socially, and we're still learning that morality means we cannot group people. We can't group humans. Now, race is embedded in American culture and in government, and it has been since the beginning. After all, wealthy white men started this country, and they're the only ones really mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. And that's why the constitutions had to be amended so much. But the Founding Fathers also used Western Enlightenment values, see John Locke, for example, to design our democracy, and which is the basis of that extraordinary document. Now, this history, I say that because history is not our focus today. So I'll stop with just saying that much. But it does bring to mind just a brief tangent here. It brings to mind a concept that's been in the news a lot lately, and that's critical race theory. So let me stop just a minute. I just want to give you a quick paragraph. I'm not going to go into postmodernism, I promise. But just a 1-minute primer about this. Critical race theory is a postmodernist. This is falling off my ear. It's a postmodernist theory that dates back to graduate legal studies in the 1970s. And it was intended to examine the relationship between race and government and society. And it only has 2 basic tenets. One is that race is a social construct. It's not real. It's not biological, which most of us have known for a long time. And the other tenet is that racism is systemic and that it's observable in all systems of society. Now, I haven't ever met a UU who would disagree with those observations. But there are parts of CRT that are very concerning, namely how you go about teaching people to be anti-racist. And those strategies are it's causing a lot of the current controversy right now at UUA. But that's for another day. I'm going to leave that. I just wanted to mention it. I'm going to leave that. Because today, Richard and I are going to take a much more personal look at racism. You're going to hear a dialogue between 2 white Southerners about our experience with race as we grew up and since. Richard and I are going to have a conversation, much like a lot of you who grew up in the South could have, about racial understanding and how your attitudes have changed over your lifetime. And to begin the conversation, I'm going to ask Richard about your background. Richard, you're a native, right? You were born in Columbia, and right?
Yep. I was born, in Columbia, downtown Baptist Hospital, 1944. I don't remember much about it myself, the time of my birth, but my mother tells me that it was a hot summer day, and it wasn't much fun for her giving birth to an 8-pound baby boy in the middle of June.
I can only imagine. What do you remember about your childhood here in Columbia and about the subject of this conversation, that is your upbringing and your attitudes about race?
Well, you know, when we first started talking about this, I had to review my life a lot, which we all do periodically, I suppose. And in my early childhood, there wasn't much to think about. I mean, I know that I was pretty much born same color I am now, you know, give or take a few migrating freckles. I lived with my grandparents for much of my formative years out on McLeod Road in the north part of town. We identified ourselves as Scottish Americans who identified here in the 18th century.
But what about your awareness of other people of other color as you were growing up?
Well, when I was a kid, the word race didn't really figure into anything. I mean, race to me was a car race or a race to first base with my friends. So I really, there was nothing really to think about. It wasn't part of my vocabulary or my sensitivities, you know, nothing. I didn't even know what it was. I interacted with very few people who were considered different from me. I was just in a white society. White, middle class, Baptist America, that was my circle, my personal house, the place in which I lived. I observed that other humans were of different size, shape, and gender, that girls were perhaps more bumpy than boys. But even though I noticed that some were a different color than me, I really didn't think much about it. Except maybe they had different, you know, facial features, but I didn't know what that meant.
Do you remember any specific instances that made you start thinking about the differences, or maybe that should have made you start thinking about differences?
Yeah, I do. Those of you who've been around a while, those of you who are Columbia natives particularly, remember the old Main Street, you know, before they divided it up and prettied it up, the main streets back in the 40s and 50s. Anybody remember the S.S. Kresge department store? Yeah, okay. I remember being in there one day, I was 8 or 9 years old, and seeing a sign on the wall that had arrows pointing white restrooms, colored restrooms. That was the word, colored restrooms. And there was another sign saying white water fountain and colored water fountain. Well, I knew I was supposed to use the white water fountain and the white restroom, but I didn't know why. I didn't think about it. You know, I didn't think about why. I didn't think, well, what's the difference? Does the water taste different? Are the toilets different? You know, I had no idea. So
no questions.
No, I didn't think about it any more than that.
Why there was a difference.
No, didn't think about it at all. And you know, you look back on that and you think, why didn't I think about that? And the answer is I was, you know, 8, 9 years old. My formative years hadn't even thought about some of that. So that's just the way it was to a 9-year-old kid in a South Carolina brain that really didn't need any further analysis than that. So there was no opportunity, no inspiration, no discussion in the household where I was, nothing to even think about it. So I grew up with the attitudes about, well, nothing to it. You know, that's really all there was. The kids at Frank C. Withers Elementary School where I went, anybody hear that? No. Frank C. Withers Elementary School, they were all white. My classes at Eau Claire High School, they were all white people. And the kids at my colleges, Tennessee, undergraduate, they were pretty much mostly, at least mostly white. So that's how I was. That's how I identified myself. Later in life, I identified myself like Clint Eastwood said. There was a movie he did that he identified himself. Somebody asked him, how do you identify yourself? How do you profile yourself? And he replied, I'm a white, piano-playing, heterosexual male over the age of 50. I thought, okay, that's going to be me later in life. So that's kind of where I was at that point. So let's talk about you. That's a lot of my background here. Talk about you for a moment. What was your upbringing. You grew up as a white child in Alabama, I understand?
Yes. I grew up in Birmingham in the 50s and 60s. And all the racism of the white and colored water fountains, it was just there. As a little white girl in the South, I was a fish in water. I never noticed the water. It's just the way things were. And I do remember a brief introduction, though, to racism when I think I was about 5. I was an only child. Some of you would say, yeah, we can tell. But anyway, I was an only child. And so I grew up pretty lonely, and frequently I would have paid playmates to come play with me. So my playmates were often our maid's daughters. They came to work with her. And these were 2 little black girls that I dearly loved, and we always had tea parties. So one day I set up my tea party set in the front yard, and I was getting all the dolls, and I was telling everybody where to sit. I've always been bossy. And my mother came outside and told me I couldn't have the party in the front yard. And I said, why not? And she looked over at my playmates and she said, because the neighbors will talk. You can have the tea party in the backyard. And Richard, I also want to continue for a minute where you left off about your early remembrances. They're probably pretty standard for most of us. You must have eventually become more enlightened and educated about all things racial, because as I recall, you were a public school teacher and then an administrator.
Yep.
Were there specific instances that made you more enlightened, or did you have an epiphany, a bright light on your road to Damascus of racism?
Yeah, my road to Damascus. Well, I have a distinct epiphany, but even before that, I just want to tell a piece of a story. My first job in teaching was right out of college, and this was in Tennessee. It was an all-white high school, and I was a history and a math teacher. And I remember distinctly one day we got somehow into a discussion, because I always invited students to discuss one thing or another. And we were talking about antebellum times and times of slavery and the impact of slavery and the difference between black and white people today and whatever. And one little girl raised her hands and she said, I got the solution to all this problem. Because remember, this was the time when there was a lot of outcry on college campus, and there were all sorts of stuff going on in the country. And she said, I got the solution to this problem. Let's just take all those black people and let's ship them back to Africa. That probably would have been a time for me to say something, but I didn't. You know, I just kind of let it pass.
So what about your epiphany?
Well, okay, that's fun to talk about in an embarrassing kind of way. You know, many times in your life you think, if I could go back, if I could do a, delete button or go back and redo something, I would change my whole attitude during that time. But anyhow, this epiphany, I consider that I was born or reborn or whatever when I was 26 years old. I started out, teaching in Tennessee, like I said, but I moved back to South Carolina in 1969, and I landed a job at Densville High School. Densville High School, anybody? All right. And John, we're clicking on all fours here today. Densville High School, which after I was there a year, became Spring Valley High School. Well, at Spring Valley High School, where I was strictly a math teacher because that's what the demands were at that time, we had a small population of black students. And I remember one day I was in, I think it was a teacher's lounge, and there were a bunch of teachers just sitting around talking, and the guidance counselor was there with us. And I said something that in retrospect, I said, oh, was that stupid that I said that? It was embarrassing or whatever else. I said, isn't it true that the black people in general have smaller brains than ours? And John Ramey, the guidance counselor, he looked at me as if I was stupid or uneducated or something. And he was wearing these little half glasses, and he looked down at me and he says, Of course not. Why would you ever think something like that? And there was probably more to the conversation that I don't really remember, but the idea that he thought I was stupid or uneducated or bigoted, you know, I was embarrassed, I was confused, I was ashamed.
Wow, I bet that did stick with you. Then what?
Yeah, well, I'm surprised as I think back about it, that shortly after that conversation, I found out that I had, because I was studying for my master's degree in school administration and certification at the time. I had been recommended by some of the local administrators that I apply for the job of a principalship in Kingstree, South Carolina. And so I applied, I went down and interviewed for it, and I got the job. Later on, I found out that I only got the job because nobody else wanted it. But this was 1970, I was 26 years old, and this was the first year, 1970, of a newly desegregated school system. You know, Williamsburg County, as were a lot of counties in South Carolina, very behind at that time because Brown versus the Board of Education that said you have to desegregate the schools separate but equal, which had been around for 50 years before that, that didn't apply anymore, that have to be desegregated. But they were slow getting there. But 1970, they created this school. They put the black and the white schools together. And the school where I became principal was like 90% black because all the white kids had, at the same, families at the same time, had established a white academy.
But you survived.
Yeah, I was there for a couple of years before I moved on to a job that paid more, although I look back on that now and I think, why didn't I stay there? I could have done even more. But yeah, it was a steep learning curve for me. You know, you can imagine that. I have lots of stories about that, but I just have to leave it rather than tell the stories. I have to tell you that I was a changed man after that. And since then, I have become a champion for social equity. I have worked in predominantly black school districts. I have fought with local leaders about directions that I personally was taking with my new enlightenment. I have arguments with teachers, administrators, and local leaders about what I thought was right vis-a-vis school integration. I have been in the trenches at local school districts. I have formed committees. I have marched in parades. I have carried banners. I have been suspected and threatened. So, Pat, you have any stories that match mine about the Epiphany?
Well, I don't know if I can match that one, Richard, but yeah, of course. I do have, though my epiphany occurred in a lot of in several stages. I grew up in my grandmother's house with my mother, and it was across the street from the Pike Avenue Baptist Church. So naturally, starting early, I was Baptist, and that continued through my teens. It was a great social group, a place to, a group to go places with, and so it came in handy, but then I was always an academic nerd, and I spent a lot of my time in the library, and at 16, I fell in love with science. I wanted to be an astrophysicist, but anyway, I fell in love with science, and that initiated my break with the church that occurred several years later. When I started asking everybody, and I ask everybody, Sunday school teachers, everybody, questions about evolution and culture and fairness. You know what happens with teens. You started seeing all the hypocrisy. I was told by all of them that I just had to accept everything on faith. A Sunday school teacher told me that my problem was that I read too much. And that was my break with the church permanently. And then I started college, and that's where my real epiphany happened.
Okay, so what happened then? Tell us about the real epiphany.
Well, does anybody remember 1963? Calling all old people.
Most of us, I think, yes.
MLK marching, letters from a Birmingham jail, Bull Connor with the dogs and the fire hoses, and 4 little girls who were killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. George Wallace's stand in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. All that happened in 1963. It was a hell of a year. Now, I was in Birmingham and Tuscaloosa for all of that, when all of that happened. But I didn't have any epiphany about race until 1963. I was working at the Birmingham Federal Reserve. This was back when you were able to, you could work and go to college. You could work for a year and then go to college for a year or two. Kids can't do that nowadays. But I was taking a year out to work so I could save money for my junior and senior year at the University of Alabama. I made a lot of good friends at that bank, and in May, we heard that there was going to be a protest with children marching, and it was just a few blocks from the bank, so a huge group of us went up on the roof to watch. I think it was a downtown park that it was near, and it was a march on City Hall. At first, it was really a lark, and of course, none of us had ever seen anything like that. Because you remember when Richard's Tales, it was totally different societies. And it wasn't in the newspaper either, you can believe that. Anyway, it was fun at first. Everybody was marching. There were lots of high school kids in this group. That's who it was predominantly. And there was a lot of singing. In fact, we didn't know, but that march was designed to be a spectacle with high school kids from Parker High School who were recruited specifically to make an impact, because this was when Martin Luther King was making the push for civil rights law to John F. Kennedy, and Birmingham was right there front and center. Anyway, we were up there talking and laughing. It was around lunch, I think, and then Bull Connor came stalking out and told them to stop. He was the mayor then for Birmingham. He came out and told them to stop, that the march was illegal. And then we saw behind him police with dogs and firemen with hoses standing behind them. I guess it still makes me really emotional to think about this, because it was an epiphany for me. Anyway, we saw him, and he turned the police and the dogs loose and the hoses. I could not believe what I was watching. I was 19, but I had no experience with race as far as I knew, and it absolutely turned my stomach. But what turned my stomach even more was what my friends, my white friends that were standing behind me, were screaming. One of them said, "Turn the dogs loose." And another one said, "Kill the niggers." Yes, I said the N-word. And to those people that might upset, I did it for a purpose, to make the impact about how ugly it was. Now, I never used the N-word even back when I was 16, because in middle class, in upper class, it was considered a slur even back then. But you better believe that people said it when they got angry. And that's what I heard. That malice, that ugliness that was there on that roof that day, I couldn't forget it. And I vowed to myself that day I was leaving the South, that I was not going to stay around people like that. And I did. And in 1965, after Dinah and I got married, as soon as he got out of school, we left the South and went to the Midwest. And we stayed there for 20 years before I came back to the South and started fighting racism.
Well, I don't know whose story is, your story is more intense than mine, actually, but I'm going to talk about mine a little bit more.
Okay.
At the piano.
I'll say a few words while Richard's walking over to the piano. Tribalism may be hardwired, but this kind of prejudice is learned over many, many years. And hatred of someone with more melanin in their skin is taught. And Richard's going to talk about that.
This is a song I think you've all heard by this time. It's from the second act of South Pacific, 1959, 49, whenever this was. Anyhow, in that second act, there's a young American Navy nurse, and she's explaining her racial prejudices. And she says, "This is emotional. I can't help it. It was born in me." And then there's a second character that comes in, and he says, "I'm not sure about that." Now, this character was kind of in love with the first character, but he was losing her because of her racial prejudice. So he's trying to talk her into whatever, I guess. Anyhow, he said, "I do not believe this. I do not believe those kind of things are born in you." And then there's a third character, and I forget where he came from, but anyhow, the third character says, "It was not born in you. It happens after you're born." And then he begins to sing. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late. Before you are 6 or 7 or 8. To hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be carefully taught.
Thank you, Richard. Our closing words today are from John Lewis. Ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or a presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, and each one of us in every generation must do our part. As we extinguish our chalice today, may the fire of loving kindness continue to burn deep in our hearts, causing our eyes to remain open to oppression and suffering, and opening our mouths to demand change, and strengthening our hands to act. We are the UUCC. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Pat, for sharing your heartfelt stories and experiences. This concludes today's service. You're welcome to stay, join us outside in the courtyard, or and where you can, if it is your decision, to unmask. Thank you all for being here, whether it be here in the sanctuary or with us through YouTube. Because you could have been many, many places, but you chose to be with us today. And for that and so much more, thank you.